Right, so tell me how I make a coffee. Got to put this in. The spoon's dry, that's good. That's good. So that in there, this is easy. Sugar, in my case. Good heaped teaspoon. This is a subject I have of debate I have with lots of people when they ask me how many sugars do you have. I'm like, well, depends how big the spoon is and how much you heap it. What, a big one or two if you make it a level teaspoon. Right, water, hot.
You're going to get criticised for not
Oh,
putting milk in
well, that's ridiculous. That I definitely don't agree with.
first.
I'm not sure what the theory there would be, because surely it means.
Burns the instant coffee.
Yeah, but surely if you put the milk in first, it's colder, so the sugar's going to take more time to dissolve. Maybe it's not a time thing; it's a quality thing. Oh, there's barely any milk.
Ah, yes. Using up the last of the milk.
It's all a facade just to get people to make me coffee. When I'm at home, you know, it's espresso maker out, all fancy milk frothing and syrups. And... Right, have a brew. I'm going to put it down somewhere though. Mugs available in the Retropower web shop as always. Okay, what we're on with, I'll start with this massive heap of parts that's on the floor here, which any eagle-eyed viewer might be able to spot are E-type parts. And that obviously signifies the fact that we have now started work on the E-type. So our current plan is that we're going to totally strip the car to just the body tub. We're going to blast that. We're hoping there's not a huge amount of metal work. Obviously, I'm tempting fate there. I have a feeling there's something lurking on the rear arches, and we know that the floors need a bit of work. I think that's it, but I've said that before about other cars, and they've turned out to be quite bad, so hopefully not. And then, because on this car, there's a lot of component design work we're going to be doing, we're going to get it straight into the straight back to a rolling shell basically. So we're going to take the bare shell, put the front subframe, the rear axle, the front axle, engine and transmission back into it, so that we can start on all the parts design and packaging work, because a lot of the work that's going to be involved with this car is working out really elegant solutions to package everything in there, particularly the engine bay. Because, and I don't think we've said this yet, it is going to retain the original Jag V12. We obviously had a discussion previously about Chevy LS3s. I don't know if it was ever really a massively serious contender. It was more to get you thinking about it, because actually when you think about the pros and cons and break it down into the reasons you use a specific engine, it's actually not as obvious as you think. However, we are in agreement that it would kind of be sacrilege not to use a Jag V12. So it is using a Jag V12. It'll be an increased capacity engine. It's going to be running Gen V Heritage, not Heritage throttle bodies, Gen V throttle bodies. And they're kind of the main knowns at the moment. We've done a bit of a brainstorming session, myself and Nat, and we've got a lot of ideas for how we're going to package the engine bay more pleasingly. There's a lot of emissions gubbins on it, because it's an American import one. There's this air pump and air injectors, and there's just a lot of rubbish on it, which makes the engine bay look terrible basically. And the V12's already a fairly ugly engine in terms of all the rubbish that's on it. So all of that's going to go. And then we're looking at how we can package things like the aircon compressor. We've looked at moving the power steering pump down into the area in front of one of the footwells with an electrically powered hydraulic power steering pump, so we can then put the aircon compressor where the power steering pump used to be. So it's things like that we're working through at the minute. Also the aircon system, how we're going to package all of that nicely. Minimal space behind the dash, but there's a fair bit again in that footwell area between the footwell and the front wheel, so we're hoping to make use of that. So yeah, watch the space on that. That's just being stripped down at the minute, ready for blasting. Should be blasted by the next episode. Utah, Jim's just been carrying on with the boot installation. He's finished that insert he was building for the boot, which has got a kind of a flip up lid and hidden cubby holes underneath. Dean's taken away the side panels that he made to be leathered. I believe they're just awaiting, they've been foamed and are awaiting leather now. He's been working on the boot carpet. So it's basically boot related stuff on that. And he's also been upholstering the centre console side panels, which we made previously. We showed those being made. So I'm excited to get those back because it'd be nice to see that whole centre console buttoned up. And that's kind of the keystone that then allows us to complete all of the rest of the interior. Little bit of progress on the Mustang, not a huge amount. We were just carrying on with a little bit with the wiring, but we're at a position on that where we're kind of waiting for a few parts now. There's been an unexpected backlog on some of the bits we've been getting from the States. So for instance, we're using a Dakota Digital instrument panel in it, which there's quite a long lead time on, which we didn't foresee. So we're waiting for that amongst a few other things. Going through some last jobs on Redux number 2. We're revising the boot lifter design. It's on torsion bars originally. They're too strong for the carbon boot, which is less than half the way to the original. So we tried running one torsion bar and it tended to twist it and pull it over to one side of the aperture. So we're converting that to run on gas struts, which will then be carried forward onto all future builds. And then Chevette. So lots of little details really, and finishing off jobs. We've just got back some of the parts I mentioned last week that had gone away for anodising. So the little caps that go on the brake fluid reservoir and the screen wash reservoir, little machine black anodised caps that have been now laser etched with the logos we wanted on them. And then the wheel centre caps. I mentioned last week that they were being lasered with a logo. I didn't say what. It's probably my weird sense of humour that thinks this is cool, but we've done essentially the Ford RS logo, only with RP, but obviously in a slightly tongue-in-cheek fashion in that it's actually a Vauxhall. So it's perhaps only me that gets that, the comedy in that. But nonetheless, it's a really cool design. Really, really happy with how they look actually. So they're going to be a really nice finishing touch on the outside of the car. The carbon honeycomb panel that finishes off the fuel tank aperture. We've been doing the brackets that hold that down. So it's held down with pit pins, which are basically like a machined pin that then has a little sprung bearings in the bottom of it, which are held in by another pin that runs down inside it concentrically. And when you press that pin, it pushes down and allows those balls to sort of slot into the pin, if that makes any sense at all. So it can slide out, but as soon as you push those ball bearings past a hole in a panel, they then latch into the back, and without the release button being pressed, it's completely locked in place. So we're running 4 of those pit pins down into brackets which Scott's fabricated that hold that whole panel in, and they attach to some parts of the shell that we fabricated when we were at the metalwork stage. We put in provision for those mounts. We've been tying off a few ends wiring wise as well. Obviously we had the whole wiring loom done by Bremax, but there are still little sub looms here and there where they've done a connection to feed power to, for instance in this case, the power steering ECU, which is just a DTM connector with an ignition switch live and an earth. So we've been putting the little controller in for that, putting the other half of that wiring in, running the main power feed over for the power steering, electric power steering system. It's running a Corsa B electric power steering setup on it. I've done the wiring for the fire extinguisher because that's a completely separate system to the main wiring loom. It's self-contained, it's got a battery pack in the controller for it. For obvious reasons really, if the entire wiring fails on the car, it's still got its own self-contained extinguisher system. So I've got that wired in. That's got test functionality on it, so you can press the buttons and see an LED light on the control box to make sure that all the circuits are working as they should, and it also senses whether there's a break in the continuity through the valve itself, so you can, in theory, test that it should definitely work when you actually need it to without setting it off. Funny story on that one. Another time, it was on the other Chevette actually, we had the same extinguisher system. It's a Lifeline 0360 system, and we wanted to change the valve where the chemical comes out of the extinguisher itself from, I think it was from a T-piece that it comes with, to a single elbow. And Adam took the elbow out, and for whatever reason, it went off. And I think it was like his first week or something. So he had to come to me, I think it was like literally his first week of work here, and say, I've just set the extinguisher off in the Chevette. Thankfully, the stuff that it uses is actually not, you'd think there'd be masses of like foam or something everywhere, but it's almost like a clear, liquidy chemical, and it just kind of evaporates off and it doesn't leave a lot of residue. So that was the plus side of it. The downside is it was quite an expensive refill. So that's that. What else have we done with the? Oh, had a total mental block. I'm going to look at my list. Window winders. That was probably one of the big things. We used a custom cage in this car, so it was an off-the-shelf cage. And have to hold our hands up in total admission on this one that we never checked that there was clearance between the window winders and the cage. And of course, most motorsport cars use fixed plastic windows. Because this is primarily a road car, still wanted nice, easy roll-down windows on it. But the spindle for the winder is about probably, I don't know, 3 inches away from the cage tube that comes down the front. So you couldn't actually wind the windows without the handle hitting the tube. So we racked our brains a bit on that and decided to come up with these just round, kind of knurled wheels that go on there, which are being machined at the moment. So you can basically get your hand around it and wind the window reasonably easily. It's not quite as easy as original, but reasonably easily without bashing your hand into the cage all the time. So we have a moment of panic there, but we have a solution. And I think the other thing was the carbon panel that we made previously, which fills the gap between the passenger's footrest and the underside of the dash. We've just been cutting out a couple of holes in that to mount a battery charger port. So because the battery's hidden behind that panel, we put a CTEC panel mount connector in there, so you can connect a charger into that. And also the communications port for the engine ECU. So there's just an Ethernet connection port that also mounts in that panel, so you can just plug the engine ECU in nice and easily. And that's about where we're at on that. There's also some progress on the Morris. Might just have a little wander over here actually, or at least face this way, because you can see the engine sitting over there. As a very brisk recap, the Morris is running all Mazda MX-5 suspension and subframes. It's running a Ford Zetec 200 horsepower Omex built Ford Zetec engine and a Mazda MX-5 gearbox, although it's actually a later gearbox, so it's an NC gearbox and it's NB subframes and suspension. So on the bottom of that trolley is actually the new gearbox. We've got a used gearbox for all the mock-up, because obviously at that stage we're never 100% sure whether everything's going to work as we think it will. So just a cheap used gearbox for all of that mock-up stage, and now we know it's all going to work. We've just gone to Mazda and got a brand new gearbox. To be honest, the price difference between rebuilding the existing one, when you include all of the surface finishing processes, bead blasting the casing, plating all the parts, all of the replacement parts, and the physical rebuild of the box, the price difference is negligible to buying a new one from Mazda, and at least then you know that it's built by Mazda rather than a gearbox refurbishment company. So that's that. They've been bolting some of the parts onto the engine, so the TTV flywheel and clutch are fitted, and then the adapter plate that adapts the Zetec to the MX-5 gearbox. There is one available from Retro Ford, but the starter motor position didn't really work out with the MX-5 subframe, because obviously it's not designed for that. And we wanted the starter motor to sit under the throttle bodies. So we have done our own adapter plate, which we've drawn up, and then we did a test fit in just a plasma cut stainless steel, mild steel plate. All went well. So Gary at Dynamic Precision has machined the final adapter plate in aluminium. I think we had the blank water jet actually. We had the blank for that water jet out first, and then Gary did the final machining on it, so he didn't have so much material to take out. But yeah, that's ready to go now. So it's kind of, you've got the whole engine and gearbox assembly there. And then in terms of the rest of the mechanicals, we're trying to get everything in progress at the moment. So the subframes, wishbones, essentially all the fabricated steel parts of the Mazda drivetrain have been away for media blasting, zinc metal spray, which gives it the corrosion protection, and powder coating. There's a huge batch of parts away for Xylan coating as well. Lots of that is fasteners, so nuts and bolts, etc., for all of the suspension, because it's just a much tougher finish than zinc plating. And what else have we got away on that? We've got a lot of parts coming. That's probably the other notable thing on that. So all of the wearing parts from the drivetrain, all things like bushes, ball joints, etc., they're all coming from Mazda. So essentially we're just building everything up in the background in terms of the suspension and mechanicals, so that when the guys have finished the paintwork, which you'll see in a minute, we can hopefully get it all bolted together and get it rolling fairly promptly. So that's where we're at in here. I'm actually going to hand over to Nat for the metalwork side of things, because he's much more au fait with what's going on there, and we'll see you again next week. So here's Nat.
Well, hello, thanks to Cal for the handover, and hello to everybody. First time since Christmas time. I am now proud dad, second time round. We've got a little daughter now, Poppy, and she's doing well. She's doing well, and we're all well, and everybody's good. So I'm back in the thick of it here again now. So we're going to start with Land Cruiser. Tom's been working on lots of awkward bits to do with gear shifting. Basically, we've got the shifters from the States, the actual shifters we're using now. He's finished off the mountings for those onto the transmission tunnel, and we've been working on the cables for those, the shifter cables. We've got to modify the transmission end of that arrangement so that we can make a bell crank for the cables to mount onto, so that they match the motion to the range of motion provided by the shifters, and still have that all fitted within the space available on top of the tunnel. So he's been doing that, making the mountings for the cables, and he's currently just working out the length for the longer cable, for the actual gear shift cable. Obviously we've got range change and gear change. The range change stick, they're both low car shifters from the States. Shorter stick for the range change, both cable shift. Range change is obviously only high, low and neutral on this gearbox, so that's quite easy. The gear shift is a little bit more complicated. Obviously that's got it's a 4-speed auto, so it's got a third hold, second hold, first hold, plus drive, and obviously reverse, neutral and park. We've got to get all those sorted out, and the shifters are not designed for this transmission, so we've got to modify the detents very slightly. One of the trickier bits we've got to deal with is sorting out the detents on the gear selector and making them match the detents within the gearbox. But we're going to come to that in a little bit. At the moment we're just matching the total range of travel, making sure that we can select everything and that the range of travel all matches and everything adjusts correctly, which he's pretty much done now. So that's getting there. So just a few bits of final welding left to do, and that's pretty much getting there. It's been difficult. The access is difficult, very difficult to get at the bolts for the brackets and things. So it's a bit challenging, but he's getting there. Parallel to that, George has been working on the design for the finish for the dash in terms of the controls that are being mounted into the dash. There's a bit of artistic work required there in terms of the design of the knobs that are going to be fitted, because we're integrating the controls for the Vintage Air HVAC unit, which you recall from previous episodes is all now mounted under the dash. We've got to control that, and various controls for the car, lights, etc., all the normal controls you need in a car. We want all that to look sort of homogeneous, all look together and integrated, and also sit with the theme of the rest of the vehicle. So George has been doing some nice design work on that, the preliminary design work on that, so that then the next stage we can get that to CAD. Then once we've got that to CAD, we can then get those parts machined. So that's still all progressing nicely. Tom's also been bolting various other parts in here, and then I've been doing a bit of work on this corner that's missing, because we're doing a disc brake conversion on this, and I'm going to be told by our friends in Australia and our friends in the States about the myriad of ways that one can go about doing this. The way I want to do it, for the reason that I want the wearing parts to remain Toyota parts, but I also don't want to completely reinvent the parts of the vehicle I don't need to reinvent. This is a late 40 series, so it has the fine splined shafts and the stronger CV joints, but it did have drum brakes. Now I don't know why, because most of the 40 series with those stronger outer parts appear to have disc brakes normally. Anyway, this has drums, I want it to be disc. What we're doing is we're buying a pair of 60 series hubs, which I am reliably informed will fit my spindles and bearings. Hopefully that's correct. We'll find out when they turn up, from Toyota. And then I'll be combining those with these discs, which are 60 series stroke Hilux discs, and 60 series stroke Hilux calipers. And then we'll be making some brackets which pick up off the swivel housing bolts, or the spindle bolts on here, to carry those calipers on here. I'm aware that all that can be done with 60 series parts, but then that introduces further complications with other parts. As far as I'm aware, stand to be corrected, that introduces other problems in terms of steering. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make the caliper brackets, but replace the hub with a Toyota item, and then pads, discs and calipers all stay as standard Toyota parts. So currently that's the plan. I'll find out I've done something wrong, but we'll see. So that's where we're at on Land Cruiser. moving on, we'll run around to, I don't know if I can actually get around to that side. I'll try. I think there might just be room. Yes, there is room. I'm going to stroll around here and Stu's hiding behind a door here. Stu's been busily working on, well, a couple of things. He's been doing some work on the, sorry, I'm going to make sure I'm in shot. Stu's been busily working on the sills, getting all that finished off, and then he's been working on quarter panel and getting that. He's just literally this morning, welded this, welded that. He's got the front lip put on now. He's got the top section, which he's decided to do separately. I don't know if that was mentioned on last week's, but he made the decision to do the top section separately because getting that return as part of this panel was making life harder than it needed to be. It's doable easily as part of that panel. However, if you make a mistake, you're pretty much starting again. So if you do it as a separate piece, it gives you the ability to get that top piece right, get that piece right, then put them together. And it just gives you, there's less chance of a huge amount of rework or scrap if you do it that way. Just makes life a little bit easier. So he's done that now. Second quarter's a good chunk of the way there. He's done the top flange for that. He's made nearly all of the parts in parallel. So he's pretty much done all the parts for the far side at the same time as doing this side. So that's coming on nicely. And he's now working on the doors. He's fitting X300 central locking and latch mechanisms to the car. So that we modernise the door locks so they're decent. They'll fit into the door. He's worked out how they're going to fit into the door. Obviously, we've got to modify the top frames, and there's a bit of complication with interference between the top frame and the latch mechanism and the central locking motor. So he's now got a solution to that, which is involving modifying the mounting legs for the top frame, the brass parts there. So we're going to modify the legs, the brass legs that the window slides down into, graft some extensions into those, which we'll probably be seeing next week, maybe a week after, when he does those. And we've also now worked out a plan for modifying, because we've got to, I'm looking around for the parts, but they're not there, but we've got to stretch the top window. Obviously, we've got to stretch the top frame of that, and we've decided what parts we're modifying, what we're changing. We're actually going to machine a new top rail for that from solid brass, from brass square bar. We'll machine a new and then curve that to match the curve we require, and then we're going to graft that in, mitre that into the original frame at the front and the back, and then lengthen the lower part where it's in the door. The top part actually needs shortening, so we can just cut that back when we mitre it. The rear section of frame that's going to be here, we'll mitre the standard one and shorten that, and then graft the new top rail into it. So that all makes sense. That's all going to come together. So that's pretty much where we're at with Churchill for this time. And then behind Jamie, quick whistle-stop tour of destruction here. We're now stripping the E-type down completely so we can blast that. And then we're going to reassemble the critical parts that we actually are going to be reusing back onto it once it's clean and we know what we're working with. And then we're going to do some data acquisition work on that. We're going to be doing some scanning on that to then pick up all the surfaces that we're going to need to be working with. Quite a lot of the exterior surface we need scans of, and quite a lot of the interior cockpit surfaces we need scans of. So we're going to get all that data once it's blasted and clean, and we know what we're working with. And also at that point we can assess what rot repairs are needed, because there's some, not too many, but there's some. But then with that scan data will then enable us to start the design work on the front and rear bumper assemblies, the modifications to the shell at the front and rear, and then all the modifications to the metalwork inside that are needed to do all the interior work that's going to be happening on it. So that's really just being exploded at the moment. The engine's literally just come out, the back end's just been dropped out. Gearbox will be coming out as soon as I've finished waffling on here. That'll be dropped out, and then the final bits can come off, and then next week this will be in for blasting. So we'll do a little bit of coverage on that. I think we're going to do a little separate video on it, because we're going to start to do a bit of a how-to series. I don't know if Cal's already mentioned it, but we're going to start to do a bit of a series on a restoration guide, if you like, by our thoughts on a restoration guide. And we're going to start that with a blasting and cleaning and stripping video, and how we do it and why we do it that way, and which will be based on this body shell. So watch this space on that one. Moving on swiftly from there, we're going to run around this way. We'll go round here and go and invade Gaz's body shop emporium. Hello, Gary. We're going to wander into here and have a look at Morris, which is progressing okay. Gary keeps thinking it isn't, but actually it's looking pretty good. It's just a long slog and a long graft. But he's very, very close now. There's a few areas still to go back through, but he's getting pretty close now to polyester. We're actually a bit stuck at the minute because we were waiting one of the additives we need for the polyester to be able to put polyester on. Otherwise, it probably would have already had polyester on. probably slightly prematurely in a few places, but you have to kind of make the call at some point to make it one colour and start sanding again. And it's getting pretty close to that point, but Gaz keeps finding other bits to go back over, and also we're awaiting some additives for polyester at the minute, which seems to have been a bit delayed getting into the country. So yeah, that's pretty much what you see is where we're at with Morris. It's getting quite close to the final shape in most areas. There's bits we keep finding, bits we keep going back to, bits of fit we need to address. There always is at this stage, lots of bits you hadn't expected that you find that you need to go back over, but it's getting pretty close to the right shape with not too many surprises now. So yeah, we're really keep watching the sanding on this one. And I think, as a quick whistle-stop tour of where we're at this week, that pretty much rounds things up. So until next time, we shall see you soon.